The church was filled with an eerie silence as the congregation whispered among themselves, trying to process what had just happened. Two lives had been lost that day, a father and his twin daughters, all in a tragic accident that no one could have predicted. The grief in the air was palpable, and yet there was something else, something that made the day feel even more unsettling. Father Richard, a close friend of the family, stood solemnly at the pulpit, trying to find the right words for this impossible situation. His voice was shaky as he began the eulogy, but his eyes kept darting to the back of the church. There, standing in the shadows, were the caskets of the deceased, covered with white cloth. In the midst of the sadness, Richard couldn't shake the strange feeling that had been gnawing at him ever since he had received the call. It was a tragedy like no other. The man, Henry, had been a devoted father, always at his daughter's side. The twins, Lily and Grace, had been just 10 years old, full of life and promise. How could this have happened? The accident was so sudden. They had been driving home when they were struck by another vehicle on a rainy, slippery road. It was a tragedy, yes, but what had disturbed Richard the most was the strange series of events that had followed. Something didn't add up. As the service carried on, the congregation quietly sobbed, and the air in the church grew heavier with each passing moment. But Richard couldn't help the knot in his stomach as he thought of one particular detail, the detail that was hanging over the entire ceremony. But no one seemed to have noticed. Henry's final request had been simple, that he and his daughters be buried together in the same grave. The church had agreed, and everything had been prepared. But as Richard looked over the room, he began to notice that one detail was off. He had been present for the preparation of the caskets earlier that day, and yet there was something wrong with the way the bodies had been laid to rest. Richard could see the faint outline of the girls' coffins under the white cloth, side by side next to their fathers. But for some reason, the caskets looked too new. They had been arranged hastily, and as the funeral procession moved forward, Richard's concern grew. Why hadn't the undertaker noticed the mistake? A chill ran down his spine. There was something else, something that he couldn't put his finger on, but the unease in his chest was growing. As Richard moved closer to the caskets after the service, he began to ask the staff about the details of the burial. He knew the funeral director had taken care of everything except one key detail. Henry had insisted that his daughters be buried with him. The girls should have been side by side with their father, according to their family wishes. The staff simply nodded, confirming that it had been done. But Richard's gut was telling him something different. Something was wrong, and it was too late to ignore it. Just as the service was ending, Richard was handed a note from one of the funeral workers. The note was hastily written, with an urgency in the handwriting that made his stomach drop. "There's something you need to see." The note directed him to a room at the back of the church, where the undertaker had gone after the ceremony. His mind raced as he walked toward the room, knowing that something strange had just occurred. What was so urgent that they couldn't discuss it in front of the congregation? When Richard entered the room, he froze. The faint smell of fresh wood and the overwhelming scent of disinfectant filled the air. In front of him, on the table, lay one of the twin girls' belongings, a stuffed bear. Richard knew this bear. It was Lily's. It was a gift from her father, something she cherished, a piece of her childhood that had been with her through thick and thin. But why was it here? And why was it the only thing that was found? As he looked closer, his heart skipped a beat. There was a tear in the bear's side. His thoughts raced as he struggled to make sense of it all. Was it possible? Had one of the girls been left behind? Richard had been part of every part of the funeral planning, but there was something deeply unsettling about this discovery. The piece of the puzzle that Richard was slowly piecing together was too horrifying to comprehend. One of the girls hadn't been buried with her father. The truth, hidden beneath the surface, was something no one expected. Richard's hands shook as he stood over the stuffed bear. The realization hit him like a wave. He had been at the funeral. He had seen the caskets. Both girls had been accounted for, or so he thought. He couldn't explain it. There was something more here, something far more disturbing than anyone had let on. His mind raced with questions. Where was Lily? Was it possible that she hadn't been buried at all? The bear was all he had left to go on, and that tear, it couldn't be a coincidence. Richard had seen how much Lily had loved that bear, how she had clutched it tightly even in the moments before the accident. There was no way she would have parted with it. His breath caught in his throat as he looked around the room. What was happening? Why was the funeral director acting strangely? Why had no one mentioned the error? Richard's pulse quickened as he glanced at the note again, the words from the undertaker still fresh in his mind. There's something you need to see. He had hoped it would clarify things, but now it only raised more questions. The room was too quiet, too sterile. As Richard began to pace, he noticed a small drawer in the corner of the room, slightly ajar. The drawer was inconspicuous, almost hidden in plain sight. Without thinking, he moved toward it, every step feeling heavier than the last. What was in there? He opened the drawer cautiously. Inside, there was a set of papers, documents that looked out of place. They were official-looking, stamped with the funeral home's logo. But as Richard picked them up and read through them, his stomach churned. The documents were related to the burial, and there, written in black ink, was something that stopped his heart cold. Body of twin daughter, name discrepancy. His breath hitched as he stared at the words. Discrepancy? Was this some kind of mistake? Was it possible that they had gotten the identities mixed up? Or was something much darker at play? He scanned the papers for more details, but they were vague. No specifics, no explanations, only more questions. Richard's hands trembled as he folded the papers and stuffed them into his coat pocket. There was no way he could leave it at that. This couldn't be just a clerical error. Something was wrong, and the more Richard thought about it, the more he realized that this went far beyond a mistake at a funeral. His mind flashed back to the moment when he had seen the caskets, both girls in their coffins, lying side by side next to their father. Was that image false? Were both daughters actually buried in the same grave, or had one of them been left behind? Suddenly, the door creaked open. Richard froze, his heart skipping a beat. The funeral director, a middle-aged man with graying hair, stepped into the room. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mix of worry and guilt. "Mr. Richards, we need to talk." The funeral director's voice was low, almost apologetic, but it carried an undertone of urgency. Richard didn't hesitate. "What is going on? What is this about a discrepancy in the burial? Why are the documents not clear? And where is my daughter?" The funeral director hesitated, his eyes darting nervously to the door, as if he was making sure no one was listening. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to find out like this. It was a mistake, a mix-up, a simple error, but—" He took a deep breath, clearly struggling with the words. "One of your daughters isn't here. She was never buried." Richard felt the floor beneath him shift. His mind went blank for a moment, and he struggled to comprehend what the man was saying. "What do you mean, not buried?" Richard asked, his voice trembling now. "How is that possible?" The funeral director looked around once more, before finally speaking the words that shattered Richard's world. "Lily, she's alive." For a moment, everything stopped. Richard's heart pounded in his chest, his mind unable to grasp the enormity of what he had just heard. Lily was alive? "What are you saying? How? How could she be alive?" Richard's voice was shaking now, his mind reeling with the impossible reality of the situation. The funeral director lowered his voice even further, speaking in a hushed, almost desperate tone. "The body we buried wasn't Lily's. It was Grace's." He paused, his face pale as if the truth weighed heavily on him. "We thought it was Lily, but it wasn't." The words hung in the air, and Richard stood frozen, unable to move or speak. Grace had been buried in Lily's place, and somehow Lily was still out there. But where? Richard's head spun, his thoughts a chaotic blur. The weight of the moment felt crushing, like the ground had shifted beneath him. His own daughter, Lily, had been alive all this time, while Grace had been laid to rest in her place. Richard stood frozen for a long moment, unable to comprehend what he had just heard. Lily was alive? Grace had been buried in her place? His mind struggled to piece the information together. This wasn't just a simple mistake. It was something far darker. Something had happened. Something that no one was willing to talk about. The funeral director was still standing there, nervously wringing his hands. Richard felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he couldn't let it overwhelm him. He had to focus. His daughter Lily had somehow been spared, and now he had to find her. He couldn't let her remain lost. "Where is she?" Richard demanded, his voice sharp now, cutting through the silence. "Where is Lily? How did this happen?" The funeral director swallowed hard and shifted uncomfortably on his feet. "I don't know for sure, Mr. Richards." He hesitated before continuing. "All I know is there was a mix-up during the identification process. The bodies were brought in, and when the caskets were prepared, it was assumed that the one identified as Lily was, in fact, her." Richard's frustration grew. Why had no one double-checked? Why had no one thought to ask questions? How could something so horrific have slipped through the cracks? He stepped closer, trying to keep his composure. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" His voice was hoarse, his chest tightening as the adrenaline coursed through his veins. "Why the hell did you bury my daughter without telling me the truth?" The funeral director looked down, his face filled with shame. I couldn't." His voice trembled. "It was too late when we realized the mistake. I was ordered to keep quiet about it. There were people involved, powerful people. They didn't want this getting out." Richard's heart sank. He had suspected for some time that there were more layers to this tragedy, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach turn. There were people involved? Powerful people who had kept the truth hidden? The funeral director lowered his voice even further, as though the walls themselves might be listening. "I'm not supposed to tell you this, but Lily was never supposed to die. She was never supposed to be part of this tragedy. It wasn't an accident." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean? What wasn't an accident?" His breath was ragged, his mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle began to slowly come together, but they didn't fit. How could this be happening? The funeral director glanced over his shoulder and stepped closer, dropping his voice to a whisper. "The truth is, Lily knew something." He looked around cautiously, making sure no one else was nearby. "Your daughter was caught in the middle of something much bigger than just a car accident. She had stumbled onto something that people didn't want getting out." Richard's head spun. He had no idea what the funeral director was talking about. What could a 10-year-old know that was so dangerous? The funeral director continued in a hushed tone. "I don't know all the details, but Lily was scared. She'd started talking about something she'd seen, something her father had been involved in. It had to do with some shady dealings. Your son-in-law, he was wrapped up in it too." The mention of his son-in-law only added to the confusion. Daniel, his daughter's husband, had always seemed like a man of integrity. Richard had trusted him, but now it seemed like there was a hidden world of corruption that none of them had known about. The funeral director's face grew even more tense. "Lily, she wasn't supposed to be part of this. The people involved wanted to make sure she didn't talk. They went to great lengths to cover it up." Richard's pulse raced. People involved? Who were they? And what had Lily seen? The pieces were there, but they were scattered, and he couldn't yet see the full picture. The funeral director stepped back, clearly anxious to end the conversation. "You need to be careful, Mr. Richards. If they find out you know, they'll come after you, too. I'm telling you because I know what's at stake." Richard's mind was spinning. Dangerous people, a conspiracy involving his family, and now Lily was out there somewhere. She was alive, and it was clear that she had been a part of something far more dangerous than he ever could have imagined. How could he find her? Where could he even begin? The truth was out there, and Richard was determined to uncover it. He owed it to his daughter, and to himself. Richard's heart raced as he stood there, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and anger. He couldn't let this go on. Lily was alive, and some dangerous people, had been pulling the strings all along. The thought of his daughter being in harm's way was unbearable. He had to find her. He had to make sure she was safe no matter the cost. The funeral director's warning still echoed in his mind, but Richard wasn't about to back down. He couldn't let fear control him. The man had given him the first real clue. There was something hidden beneath the surface, something his family had been unknowingly tied to. And now it seemed like Lily had stumbled onto it. Richard spent the next few days retracing his steps, visiting every person who had been involved with the funeral and those who had known his son-in-law, Daniel. Everyone seemed to be either too scared or too closed off to provide any real answers. Every conversation felt like hitting a brick wall, but Richard knew that something was out there, and he couldn't stop until he found it. Finally, after days of fruitless searching, Richard received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar. It was Sarah, Lily's best friend from school. Richard had tried to reach her earlier, but she had been unreachable. Now she was calling him back. "Mr. Richards?" Sarah's voice trembled through the line, a hint of panic in her words. "I need to tell you something. You need to listen to me carefully." Richard's pulse quickened. "What's going on, Sarah? Where's Lily?" His voice was urgent, his patience fraying with each passing moment. "I don't know exactly where she is, but I know who's been looking for her." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to be careful." Richard gripped the phone tighter. "Who's looking for her?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. Sarah hesitated before speaking again, and Richard could hear the fear in her voice. "It's the same people who were after her dad, the ones who were trying to keep him quiet." Sarah paused. "Lily. She found out something she shouldn't have." Richard's mind spun. Who were these people? What had Lily learned, and why was her life at risk? The questions were endless, but he couldn't get distracted. He needed to focus on finding her. "Where can I find her?" Richard asked, his voice steady now. "Do you know where she is?" "I wish I did," Sarah replied, her voice breaking. "But I do know she's been hiding, running. I've seen her a few times, but only from a distance. I think she's been trying to stay off the grid. She's afraid they'll come after her again." "Who's after her, Sarah?" "Who are these people?" Richard asked, his voice growing more desperate. "I can't say much, Mr. Richards. I don't want to get involved, but you need to find her. She's in more danger than you know. I don't know how long she can keep running." Richard's mind raced, the urgency of the situation settling deep in his chest. Lily was out there somewhere, hiding from these people, and she needed him. More than ever, Richard knew he had to find her before it was too late. The call ended with Sarah's whispered words still echoing in his ears. "Please be careful." Richard hung up the phone and immediately set to work. This was no longer just about his daughter's death. This was about keeping her alive. He couldn't let her be another victim in whatever twisted game these people were playing. He knew where he had to go next. The last place Sarah had seen Lily, the abandoned house near the edge of town, was where he would start his search. But as Richard made his way toward the house, the chill in the air felt heavier, more oppressive than before. He wasn't sure what he would find there, but one thing was certain. The clock was ticking. Lily was running out of time, and he couldn't lose her again. The house loomed ahead, dilapidated and eerie, its windows boarded up and its walls cracked and weathered by years of neglect. It was the perfect place to hide. The silence around it seemed unnerving, as if the very ground beneath it was hiding secrets. But Richard had no time to hesitate. He moved forward, his heart racing. As he approached the front door, he heard something, a soft sound, barely audible above the wind. It was a voice, low and quiet, almost like a whisper. Richard froze, straining to hear. Was it Lily? His breath caught in his throat as he crept closer, his footsteps barely making a sound on the gravel path. "Lily," he called out softly, his voice trembling. The whisper stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. Then a small figure stepped out from behind the broken fence, her face pale and drawn. It was her. Lily. "Dad," she whispered, her voice shaky but relieved. "You found me." Richard's heart surged with a mix of joy and relief. He had found her. But as he stepped forward to embrace her, he realized something was wrong. There was fear in her eyes, fear of something more than just hiding from the authorities. "Lily, what's going on?" Richard asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Who's been after you?" Lily looked around nervously before taking his hand and leading him inside the house, away from prying eyes. She had to tell him everything. As Richard stepped into the dimly lit house, his heart pounded in his chest. The cold air inside was thick with dust, and the silence seemed to envelop them both, swallowing their voices. Lily led him through the house, her small frame looking even smaller in the vast emptiness. It was clear she had been hiding here for a while. Her eyes were hollow and her movements were cautious, like she didn't fully trust her surroundings anymore. Richard couldn't bear seeing her like this. His little girl, so full of life just days ago, was now a shadow of the child he once knew. But there was something more, something in her eyes that told him this was much bigger than just running away from home. "Lily, what happened?" he asked softly, kneeling down to her level. "Why did you leave? What's been going on?" Lily looked up at him, her lip quivering. She hesitated before speaking, as though she were choosing her words carefully. "I saw things, Dad. Things I wasn't supposed to see." Richard's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of things, Lily?" She took a deep breath and glanced around nervously before speaking in a barely audible whisper. I saw people, Dad. People in the shadows. They're bad. They're really bad. And they hurt people." The weight of her words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. "Bad people? Who were these people? Who are they, Lily?" "What do they want?" Richard asked, urgency creeping into his voice. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she wiped them away quickly, trying to stay strong. "I don't know, Dad, but they said they would hurt you if I told anyone. That's why I ran. I couldn't let them hurt you." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. He had known there was more to the story. He had known there was something deeper, darker, hidden beneath the surface. Lily had witnessed something no child should ever see. "You don't need to worry about me, sweetie," Richard said, his voice firm but soothing. He took her hand in his and squeezed it gently. "I'm going to protect you, no matter what. You don't have to be afraid anymore." But deep inside, he was terrified. The people Lily had seen, the people who had scared her so much. Who were they? And why was his family being dragged into something so dangerous? Lily seemed to sense his worry and quickly added, "I don't know who they are, Dad, but I remember one thing. They knew about Mom. They knew about her before she died. And I think they had something to do with it." Richard's blood ran cold. Could it be? Could these people be the reason behind his wife's sudden death? It made sense. He had always wondered if there was more to her passing than a simple illness. But now it seemed like this was all tied together. Ethan, his son, the girls, his wife's death, all of it. Before Richard could process this new revelation, he heard a faint sound coming from outside, the sound of tires crunching against gravel. His eyes darted to the window. Someone was coming. "Lily, you need to hide," Richard ordered, his voice low but urgent. "Now, quickly." Lily didn't hesitate. She darted for the back of the house, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. Richard rushed to the window, his pulse quickening. His worst fear had come true. The people Lily had seen were close, and they were getting closer. He peered through the window, his breath catching in his throat as he saw a black SUV pull up near the front yard. Two men got out. They were dressed in suits, and their presence sent a wave of dread through Richard's chest. The men stood at the entrance for a moment, looking around before walking toward the house. They had come for Lily. Richard's instincts kicked in. He grabbed the phone from his pocket, quickly dialing Detective Foster. The phone rang twice before Foster picked up. "What's going on, Richard?" Foster's voice was calm, but Richard could hear the concern. "They're here. The people who've been after us." Richard's voice was frantic. "I need help now." "Stay calm. I'm on my way. Where are you?" Foster replied quickly. Richard gave him the address and hung up without waiting for a response. He had to act fast. The men were getting closer, and soon they would be inside the house. He couldn't let them take Lily. He just couldn't. He moved toward the back of the house, finding Lily hiding under a table, her wide eyes filled with fear. He knelt beside her, his heart aching as he whispered, "Lily, listen to me. You need to stay hidden. Do not come out until I say it's safe." Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the stuffed bear tightly. Richard took a deep breath and turned to face the door. He had to protect his daughter no matter what. The truth was finally coming out, and there was no turning back. He was ready to face whatever came next.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.